Howdy and welcome back. So what are design patterns? Before we get into that, I want to begin with an analogy. And I'm sure this isn't the only one that perhaps you'll be able to think up of after we've finished this this video once you know what a design pattern is. But this is the one that was presented in the design patterns textbook, essentially the textbook on this subject matter. The reference is actually down there at the bottom of the slide. They provide an example to kind of build it up and go. Novelists and playwrights rarely design their plots from scratch. Instead, they follow patterns like the tragically flawed hero seen in Macbeth and Hamlet, or the romantic novel, just to name a couple of these patterns that appear. There's a number of different literary devices that can be employed by novelists and playwrights to achieve some sort of end. But there's kind of this pattern that can be reused or as a solution to some sort of maybe ends within that. But if we look here, I mean, you can employ one of these patterns, but you can get very, very unique pieces of literature derived from them, despite the fact that they're arising out of kind of this common template, if you will. So let's, now take a step back and try to relate this to programming. So programmers follow patterns too. I mean, within our applications, if we want to represent state, well, we're probably going to use an object to go ahead and contain that state. In addition to this, there's some patterns or means that we can create objects where it's more readily able to add and remove features to them. We'll probably not talk about decorating objects necessarily in this class. If you're interested in this design pattern, I'd go ahead and recommend that you look it up and spend a little bit of time tinkering with it. But what we will see by the end of today's lesson is that patterns allow a lot of design decisions to follow automatically. So we might have a problem. What we'll see is that design patterns kind of a template of a solution that can be applied to solve a particular problem. So deja vu. How many times have you encountered a problem before, but could not recall specifically when or how you solved it? If you remember the details to that problem and how you solved it, maybe the first time you encountered it, well, you could reuse that experience instead of trying to sit down and rediscover it. So the question here is, in software design, a lot of this is going to happen where we're encountered with a problem, we come up with a solution, and then maybe later on we encounter a similar problem. It would be really cool to be able to, think back and go, that I saw this before, and this is what I did to resolve it. And, maybe you capture some of these ideas through documentation, et cetera. But a lot of times you're probably, it might look familiar, but over a career, even a year, you'll be confronted with a lot of materials. So how can you kind of document, your solutions as you arrive? And obviously with experience, the more time you're applying particular solutions, the better you'll be able to, come to recognize, oh, this, I should kind of go this route to solve that problem and not another. But the question is, okay, well, how can we record these experiences in software design so that we can kind of apply a template to solve some of these reoccurring problems, although their presentation might be kind of very different in terms of what we're looking to achieve at the end of the day, because it would be within the context of that specific application. So what is a design pattern? This is going to be a quotation by Christopher Alexander, taken again by the Design Patterns textbook. Each pattern describes a problem which occurs over and over again in our environment, and then describes the core of the solution to that problem in such a way that you can use this solution a million times over without ever doing it the same way twice. It all makes sense almost till you get to without doing it the same way twice. How? Well, we'll see. Again, it's going to be a template that can be kind of refined or applied to a particular problem. So you're looking at, let me try to, I'll explain this, I guess, maybe a bit better with the micro patterns that we'll introduce, because I think the utility of the patterns becomes clear, because you kind of have this procedure on how to solve it, but what's actually being solved could be relatively different depending on the context or the application. And then I took this as kind of additional definition of what a design pattern is. It's also from the design patterns text. So they say a design pattern can be considered descriptions of communicating objects and classes that are customized to solve a general design problem in a particular context. So again, it's like all this generality, but within a kind of focused, or so maybe it's better to say kind of a more abstract thing that can be applied in a concrete way. I don't know if that works or not, but let's keep going. Let's look at what constitutes a design pattern. So each design pattern is going to have 4 essential elements. We'll have a name. We'll have the problem it solves, the solution, and then the consequences or trade-offs of using it. These next couple of slides will run by quick, but let's talk about what's in a name. So the pattern name, it's going to be a handle that's going to be used to describe a design pattern, its solutions, and consequences, all in a single word or two. And the reason why we're going to start to begin naming our patterns is because that allows us to develop vocabulary that when we're, say, interacting with our colleagues, your peers, writing code documentation, we can say some sort of pattern name, maybe the strategy pattern, and your colleagues will know what you're talking about without actually having to go through and explain, well, what is it, where is it applied, and what are its trade-offs? And if you're not familiar with that, it's very easy to quickly look that up for a quick refresher. But if you didn't have the name, notice this would just be rather difficult to kind of talk about. So this will, again, allow us to develop a vocabulary for patterns for use in conversations, documentation, and pretty much wherever else. So next is out of these 4 essential elements is going to be, well, what is the problem? So we have a design pattern. We need to know when we'd like to apply it. So we must know the problem and its context that this sort of pattern is going to be applicable to. Thereafter, we also have to think about the solution. So how is the pattern composed? What is the actual thing we're applying to the problem to arrive at the solution? So this will be an abstract description of how the design pattern is going to solve a concrete problem. And again, there's going to be some tailoring here. You'll have maybe this sequence of steps to do something, or even a, I guess, template sort of notion, but you're going to have to tailor that to your particular problem to actually come to the solution. So the solution, again, is not going to be concrete because the pattern is going to have to be adaptable to many different situations within it. Finally, with anything, there's trade-offs. So we must consider the consequences of a particular pattern. So the results and trade-offs of applying this is definitely going to be part of kind of our pattern's overall description and considerations if we were to take it and apply it to some sort of situation. So with that, let's introduce a couple of micro patterns, and then we'll go ahead and close out today's lesson with the strategy pattern.